So be ready for your answers, or maybe you want to scan and whatever they want to do it. So that's going to be one of the things, and each of the questions have a goodies to take away. So be ready and get ready. So get secured. So with no further ado, I welcome Sheldon to take the session forward.
Thank you, thank you. So we're just going to make a quick switch over here. Give me a second. Cool. Can you guys hear me in the back? Good. We want to increase the volume a little bit. Okay, cool. First of all, thank you for coming into this session. I know we have like 3 other sessions, so I'm going to use your time as judiciously as possible. So yeah, the topic for today's event is evolving threat landscape, navigating the changes of dynamic cloud security. I know the title is rather large. When Aparna, our marketing folks, sort of told me that this is going to be our topic, it got me to think about like how security has been moving on. I'm sure everyone understands that things have evolved over time, right? No matter what we've done, whether it be at war or security or wherever, things generally tend to evolve as time goes on. Things get more and more complex. And speaking of evolution, I just want to quickly get an idea about how many people actually know what Akamai does. From the room, I mean, just shout it out. We don't have to keep it very formal. But how many people know what Akamai does? CDN. Anything else that we do? WAF. Okay, excellent. Anything else? ETA? EDN. CDN, yes, CDN. So I've heard CDN, I've heard WAF. Anything else? DDoS protection, excellent. Anything else? Cool. I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. So when Akamai started, we started out in 1998. It was, it was a project that started out in MIT between Dr. Tom Layton and Danny Lewin. And the whole solution that they were trying to do, right, back in 1998, the idea was like, it was just before the dot-com bubble and everybody wanted to get an application online. And the internet, if you like go back and figure out how it was architected, it was never really architected for performance. And Akamai set out to solve the quote-unquote worldwide wait, right? Because as soon as you loaded a website, it took probably hundreds of seconds to load. So Akamai started off with this technology called CDN, or Content Delivery Network. Essentially, if you guys are really technical, there is this algorithm called the stable marriage algorithm. It's pretty funny. If you have the algorithm talks about, let's say if you have 10 men and 10 women, and each of them decide like who they want to get married to by order of preference, how do you map all of those people so they get they get the choice of order? Similarly, let's say if you have students and certain courses, how do you map that out? In our world, it's going to be for 1 million users and let's say 100,000 servers. How do you map them and get the most optimal server aligned to them, right? So that's what we started off with. And then 10 years down the line, we actually started out with our first WAF, like a few of you know, right? So 2008, we started the first cloud WAF. We essentially started catering to the needs of people. So the first decade was about people going online. The second decade was about protection. And now we're sort of halfway through our second decade. And this is where, Akamai basically, owns the market when it comes to CDN. We are the best WAF player in the market. If you look at like reports like Frost & Sullivan or Gartner, you'll definitely see us always sitting in the first quadrant. And among the leaders, we'll always be the leader, like so the top right-hand corner. Now, in this decade, what we're trying to solve for is very specific use cases and very complex use cases. So things around account takeover, why can't I host my application with Akamai? So we made a purchase of Linode, if you guys know about it. So now Akamai has purchased and done a lot of M&A and started acquiring a lot of companies. So recently in the last, I think about a year and a half, we got Guardicore, which is a leader in microsegmentation. Linode, now you can deploy your apps on us. We got Neosec, which is about API security, and we'll be talking about that today, as well as Guardicore. So what this has made is Akamai has evolved into something called the Akamai Connected Cloud, and it's literally the largest cloud platform. I mean, don't even worry about the most distributed. If you need to know where Akamai is, it is there. It's there in all of the countries. It's literally there in your city, whether it be tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We have presence across everything. And Akamai essentially becomes this full stack cloud solution where you can deploy your application, deliver your application, and then also secure your application right at the edge, right? And since we are in India and we want to talk about India specifically because India is a very important market to us, and it's probably the fastest growing market for Akamai, right? So when we talk about India itself, we have about 300 plus deployments. So let's say you have, you're a bank and you want to make sure that, you're serving your tier 2, your tier 3. These are the new penetrations that we're trying to look into. Akamai is definitely going to have a server out there. So not only can you cache at the edge, you're also securing that person as soon as they make that network connection. And then again, you can deliver over there as well. Because what we're trying to do is, even with our deployments within Linode, sure, we're going to cover metros, but we're also going to start covering other areas, right? Things that are underserved. So yeah, and then the only other takeaway that I want you to understand is we work heavily with enterprises, BFSIs, SMEs, you name it, we have it, right? We work with the who's who of the internet, and that's essentially the takeaway from the slide. Now, and also feel free to raise your hands. I know this is a very formal setting, but just keep it casual. If you have any questions, shout it out, raise your hands. If I don't look at your hands, I'm sure someone else will definitely point it out, right? So I'm going to deep dive into the security portfolio, and the next slide is going to be a slightly busy, so apologies about that. But essentially, the breadth of our portfolio has always evolved, and we keep expanding it. So that's what you're going to see in the next slide, right? So just to level set, what are you looking at right now? This boundary is essentially your enterprise, whether it be cloud, whether it be, say you're sitting on Control S or a co-location, it doesn't matter. You have a bunch of data stores, you have applications, you have microsegmentation, microservices, you have APIs that are being used. And then you have your employees, your partners, and your customers. Essentially, even your employees and partners, they are all customers to your, at the end to your infrastructure, right? Now the adversaries, we're talking about non-compliant devices, bot attacks, web application attacks, DDoS, malicious attacks, and so on and so forth. And this is where Akamai comes in. That orange line is supposed to be Akamai. And what we essentially strive to do is protect you from multiple areas. So there's a whole zero trust portfolio that I can do a masterclass on. We have a whole unified app and API protections. And then we have infrastructure services as well. So that's sort of protecting you from the outside and from the inside out. But even within your network, right, you'll have APIs that are vulnerable. You have shadow APIs, zombie APIs. You have data scraping happening from compromised systems. And this is where, what we are trying to talk today about. The bottom left over there is protect your APIs. So the first half hour, today's agenda is essentially the first half hour, I'm going to be talking about API security. And in the next half hour, we're going to be talking about microsegmentation, and my colleague Prateek is going to be taking you through that. Right? So any questions thus far? Cool. Now, WAF. That's the only thing I have on the slide. I really want to talk about it because, again, I'm hinging on the idea of evolution that Akamai has seen and the industry that's seen as a whole. So I think we've already had this question, but how many of us actually use a WAF? And on your deployments, even on your, let's say, your QA environments, how many people actually have a full-blown WAF, right? I would assume, hopefully, that everyone uses some sort of WAF because that's, at basic, that's the most viable or the most crucial security product that you should have. Start blocking at least elementary level attacks. Now, something that has changed over the, I believe it's the past year or year and a half, there's this term floating around the market, and if you search any of your WAF providers, you would have seen the term WAAP. Does anybody know what WAAP stands for? Anybody? Okay, good. Wow, that's surprising. So after you're done with the session, just go out and search WAF providers or WAF, vendors, whatever, name it, right? You will not see the term WAF anymore. The term WAF is gone, it's done, it's dusted. companies like Gartner and any of your big WAF providers, they don't talk about WAF anymore. Everyone's talking about WAAP, and the AP essentially stands for API protection, right? No more can you just have a WAF and say, I'm done, dusted, security is done, let's wrap it up, game over, right? It's all about API protections. Because of how large APIs are becoming and how crucial they're becoming to your framework. I mean, I was a developer in the past, and I remember about 6 years ago when I was doing things like Angular and React Native and React, it was always the idea that, hey, you have a front-end application, a full-blown application that has to have APIs to talk to the backend, and then the backend was talking to a bunch of other APIs for the for like your database, or let's say you have a Lucent search engine, whatever it might be, right? So APIs are very important, and that's essentially why the market has shifted from just WAF to WAF and API protection, right? So we're essentially what the next few slides are going to be talking about is the rise of APIs, and it's essentially this attack surface that connects all of us together. Now, I just want to quantify like why are we starting to talk about API security? Why not WAF? Why is it not part of WAF? Why is it not part of bot management, right? APIs by itself is a wholly different area and a different attack surface. And what we're starting to see is more and more as applications start to develop, let's say you're a bank, or let's say you're an insurance company, BFSI, e-com, whatever you might be, your developers, the first thing they're going to start doing is, besides creating a front end and a back end, the way they're going to start talking to each other is going to be using APIs, right? So we're going to see a whole lot of new APIs coming in. Akamai is predicting about at least double APIs. I've seen other reports saying that there's been a 300 increase on APIs. For Akamai specifically, what we've seen is about 31% of the traffic that's protected are only APIs, which is, there's a major gap over there, right? So I wanted to do a little more research and figure out where is the gap? Like, why are we not protecting it? What's happening? And then obviously you take a look at, you know, these market research, the people who do really good research. Like Akamai does the research based on our customers, but what about everybody else? And that's where I picked up a Gartner report. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the hype cycle. So the hype cycle is essentially every time there's a new technology that comes in, it has this massive hype cycle. It goes up, it becomes super popular, and then it goes down, and then eventually it matures. So this technology is super, like it's still in an adolescence phase, as you can see over there, but the benefit rating is high, and that's the highest you can get for Gartner, right? And the market penetration, what here we're talking about is the target audience, banks, e-commerce companies, you name it. Only about 5 to 20% of people are even considering this, right? So that means we have about 95 to 80 to 95% of the people who have absolutely no API threat protection, and they're not even looking towards it right now. And that is the reason why, you know, when we decided to do the session, we said this is something that we want to highlight to everybody because this is something new. So yeah, just to take it away, 80 to 95% of the people need to start looking into this. And the reason you have attacks like this happening is most probably these are the folks that are not thinking about it, right? And it's not just your company. These are billion-dollar startups that have not considered it. You have Facebook, you have Venmo, you have, I'm not going to take any Indian audience because I don't want to shoot myself, but the idea is that this is happening and this is going to continue to happen for a very long time, right? So again, sort of going back to the idea of WAF, right? How many of us know what OWASP is? Like the open source, cool, right? Everybody knows. How many people know that OWASP has a whole different API section to it? Okay, cool. So the audience definitely knows. I am not going to continue the session where I break down each one of these. I think that's fairly boring, and you can definitely just open up GitHub or go to the open source place and read through all of this. But these are the 2023. There were 2 editions. One was in 2019. These are the updated ones. I think some of the terms have also changed. Like IDOR was the most common one, and now we are looking at BOLA. It's just a rename or a rebranding of it, but essentially these are it. I'm sure everyone already understands that the way these are even listed is based on the highest attack vector. Like BOLA tends to be the #1 thing that we definitely see, right? So again, a little more, I want to dive a little more deeper and talk to you about a few use cases. I think this will be fun. Hopefully you find it as well. So this was a real attack for one of the aggregators. I'm sure you've used them in your life before. If you'll figure it out. I've tried to anonymize some of it, but you'll figure it out. So the workflow over here was essentially if I was a driver and I was inviting another partner, let's say my friend who also drives a taxi, I would send them a link to onboard them. Now, when I generate that link and I send it, or I send it to my friend or my family, what they were able to do is when they were signing up, there's a consent screen. And now within the consent screen, you would send your user ID. Now, props or good job by the taxi aggregator. They actually had an encrypted user ID, which you're seeing at the bottom. However, if you had to figure out another person's unique user ID or UUID, you were able to pull out a whole ton of information from them. And this is what the response to that JSON looked like. And it's truncated. This is not even the full response, right? So not only am I looking at, the name of the person, I have their last date, I have their DOB, I have their mobile token, I have their email address, I have an email token, which I can send them emails to, right? I have a nickname, I have a whole bunch of information. So this was obviously a violation of API security, but I just want to get a quick sort of 30 seconds. Which ones of these you think that were actually broken? Any ideas? Just shout them out. Which of these top 10 attacks were actually abused over there? Which one? 16. Third from the right. Okay. API, so it's actually API 6. So you have API 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So unrestricted access to sensitive business flows. Okay. Any other ones? Eight. API security misconfiguration. Okay. What else do you guys think? 3. 10. Unsafe consumptions of APIs. Okay. Any other ones that you can think of? Yep. API 1, exactly. Any other ones? So I'll go over it again, right? I have an API. I'm sending a post request. I am sending that language and user ID, and I can add anyone's user ID, and I can get a response. 5. Okay. Broken function level authorization. Okay. Cool. And 2, broken authentication. Yeah, I think you guys are almost right. I heard 1 and definitely 4. So I'll tell you about 4. Why 4? The reason is you're getting far too much information in this API. If I'm looking for a consent screen, I'm just looking for yes or no. I don't care what the user's ID is. Or maybe I care about the user ID. I don't care about his last name, his first name, his DOB, his email address. It is literally a consent screen. I should say, okay, Sheldon Fernandez says yes to joining the partner program. Should I care for it has opted for marketing email? No. I don't need that information. That's unnecessary traveling. These are all extra details, right? So good. Thanks for that. I'll give you another one. This is fairly interesting. I was a little worried about the audience. Whether the audience has used dating apps in the past. I will not take a poll of it, but I've definitely used them in the past. I'm married now, but this is one that was in India too. They did like quite a bit of campaigning in India. I think a few of our Instagram followers also pushed this application. So what happens with this app is now, I don't know, is everybody familiar with dating apps? No. Okay, no one's familiar with dating apps. Brilliant. Okay, essentially what you do for this audience has not used it is you have an app and you see a bunch of that's what I'm thinking. But, left swipe, right swipe, correct. So what this dating app does is now the psychology behind it, you have a bunch of them, right? Is you have a men's psychology and a women's psychology. Men are just going around swiping left, or rather right. I forget which one is it. Accept. Women go ahead, deny. But what these apps decided to do is, hey, what if I create a premium feature and I pay $10? The US price was $10, but I want to create these premium features where I can give the user more ability, right? So I'll go through some of them. So the first one was, what they started to see is a lot of users basically kept swiping, right? You are standing in line in the metro, swipe. You're sitting at work, swipe. So they didn't want to get people to go through the whole catalog of people essentially. So you were limited to 100 swipes a day. But guess what? we're talking about API security, so obviously there's an API security flaw over there. What happened was there was absolutely no check at the back end. It was literally a function that was sitting on the front end. So whether and especially if you use the web app, right, you were able to bypass this by just capturing it maybe on, I don't know, Postman and keep running it. You could keep swiping as much as you wanted. There was literally only a front end protection over there. There was nothing in the back end, right? So that's an API flaw. Now, another thing is, again, if you keep swiping, your hand gets into that gesture of, no, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this person. And eventually you see someone, your brain reacts a little slowly, but your hand is already swiped. So what if you want to sort of backtrack and go to the person and say, you know what, I actually do like this person. Again, the major flaw over here was at the paid version, you were able to backtrack and see, okay, oh, I missed this person, I missed whatever. Let me go back. Now, again, over here, nothing. You could literally just start looking at the APIs and say, okay, vote 1 was essentially I have not voted on person A. Vote 2 means I voted yes. And vote 3 means I voted no. You were able to backtrack and then look at basically there was a function called over there where you could just say, okay, you know, vote 2 for this person, go back in time, figure out the user ID and do it. Now, I'll get to the third one. And the third one is the absolute doozer. Like it was game over after the third one. But another thing, something that you need to realize is, while this dating app actually used a user unique ID, they also accepted plain text user ID, and they were doing enumeration over there. Meaning, when I added a new user to a database, it was literally going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They had not created a unique user ID over there. So, advanced filtering for premium users. Now, I'm sure since none of you guys have used a dating app, at least you might have used a marriage app, right? And in that marriage app, you have advanced filters, right? Because Indians are very specific about their criteria for their marriage partners. Now, here, you are able to create these very fine-tuned filters of who you want as a partner, who you want as a preference. Again, over here, since they were doing enumeration, I could literally call get user /1/2/ I think it was some 0 to 2 billion. And you could just enumerate everyone, get it in an Excel sheet, and you are done, right? Now, obviously, I mean, it was a flaw. They lost money. But the bigger point over here is, me as a platform, I have specific sets of users, and this is my USP, right? Now, if someone is able to enumerate all of it, take it away from my platform is now useless. I've not only lost the $999 or $9.99, I've lost all my users, and I can just export it somewhere. Now you're talking about multiple violations. The people with their date of births and sexual preferences and whatnot exposed on the dark internet for people to download. So yeah, and very surprisingly, the company actually took 6 months to solve this, which is the reason why I'm not bringing it out over here, right? So I'm not even going to attempt to think about how many of these OWASP top 10 they violated. It would be safe to assume a lot of them. But what you need to take back is the flaw was so simple. The validation was just done at the front end, and they didn't even think about doing a validation at the back end. Like, forget about BOLA and broken function level authorization. There was none of it, right? Even in the Java code, like if you actually go and when there was an investigation done on it, they didn't even have like a proper decision engine or a scoping done over there. So sure, I mean, today I'm going to be talking about API security or what you can do with Akamai, but this problem needs to start, you need to solve it all the way at the left, right? I'm sure you've heard of the shift left proposition, right? Start looking at solving things at the creation of APIs. Like, security needs to be pushed down from the top down, because developers are not going to make it a priority for you, right? So that's what I want to talk about. So I'll move into API security, but I think we'll do it at the end. Cool. So there's this whole gift section and quizzes, so stay tuned. But yeah, now I'm going to move into the API security part. But any questions thus far? I think it's pretty simple so far. I've not talked about anything too mind-blowing. Cool. Now, it'd be unfair of me to say that, your WAF is not protecting you at all. In fact, even Akamai does a whole bunch of API security at our end. So your app and API protector is definitely needed. It is part of the puzzle. And as you can see, the topic of defense in depth. and I'm sure any security vendor that talks to you has talked to you about the idea of, there's no silver bullet, there's no one solution that will always help you out with anything. There is always going to be an idea of have multiple solutions in place. Happy to talk to you outside about, like, there's this concept of the Swiss cheese model where you want to keep as many layers of security between you and your priced crown. So yeah, an API protector or an app protector is definitely going to be good. It does DDoS protection. It protects you from SQL attacks, which are also API attacks. And then you have your API gateway. Again, very crucial, because sure, you can do DDoS limiting and rate limiting at your WAF, but you'll also want to start putting in rate limits at certain particular login endpoints, or maybe a endpoint that enumerates all the users. Have a number of limits of how many times someone can ask that, or how many times someone can make a request to it. But this third part is where the evolution is happening on API security, and you want to start thinking about, like, threat hunting services, blue team, red team, go figure out, go attack my APIs, come back with information, figuring out how many APIs do I have, vulnerability monitoring, figuring out whether my OWASP is, so on and so forth, right? And this is where I'm going to start shifting into, a little more API security, a little more what we do specifically. But your takeaway from the slides going on is, these are generic concepts that you can implement even at your side. But obviously, if you pick a security vendor like Akamai, it can be a whole lot easier, right? So this is the maturity idea, right? For companies that are just starting out in the API security domain, the very first thing that you need to do is understand how many APIs actually exist, right? Like, if I take a bank, because I saw a few banks over here, you have your LMS system, you have your CASA, you have your credit management system, you have other business APIs. Like, how many of these APIs exist? How many development teams? And what is the rate at which you're developing APIs and you're removing APIs? So the idea is you can't protect something, or you can't govern something that you don't have visibility over. So the first step is to understand, what am I governing over? How many APIs? Do I have 10 APIs? Do I have 10,000 APIs? Do I have 100,000 APIs? And in many cases, from the customers that I've been talking to, we are all stuck at number one. There hasn't been a single DevSecOps guy that has, or lady that has seen, all their APIs, who have a single view of everything that is there. So let's start out simple. And in this digital age, it's really, not fair to say that you don't have any visibility. You need to gain complete visibility of how many APIs are there, how many new APIs are coming out, and what are the zombie APIs or decommissioned APIs. Once you have that idea, then you move on to the next stage of, okay, from these APIs, which ones are vulnerable? Which ones are, violating the OWASP top 10? And once you have that done, then comes the API abuse. Sure, maybe there's an API that is not abusing the top 10, but is there a partner, is there a user that is abusing your API? Or figuring out there is some logical back-end workflow that someone is abusing, right? So those are the steps that we essentially want to take. The next slide is basically about continuous APIs, workflow, risk, and audit. It's just the idea of where Akamai is headed towards, right? So I talked about Neosec. So Neosec is one of these newer companies that we acquired. It's now called API Security from Akamai. And we are doing a very ML-based approach or AI-based approach where we want to gather data, churn that data, and understand how APIs are being used. So let me actually get into that. Now what you're seeing over here at the bottom, this is your customer premise. It could be, again, on-prem, it could be cloud, whatever it might be. Essentially, what you would do with the Akamai solution is take all these logs and just ship it to us, right? Send these logs to us, and what we will start doing is start churning these logs, understand your business, right? And whoever your API security vendor is, the solution needs to understand the difference between a dating app, between a bank, between an insurance, between an e-commerce company. So it needs to understand how these APIs are actually being used. So that's what happens. So you have API discovery, risk audit, but even the behavioral detection, that is going to be your most critical part, and that is one of our major differentiators. So you have a unique XDR style SaaS platform. You just send us the logs. We'll start looking at everything over there, start discovering APIs. But the behavioral detections, building behavioral models, and I'll get into that in a little bit, that's going to be an important part. And then the last part is the investigation and threat hunting. super critical, right? Even before we had API security, Akamai has a 24/7 SOC deployed worldwide. I think we have about 7 different centers, and it runs on this model of follow the sun. So anytime you have a SOC or anytime you have an attack, Akamai basically keeps working on that attack as the day passes by, and so on and so forth. So the hunt service, or the shadow hunt service, is essentially what they're trying to do over here is look into your data. These are folks that are dedicated to finding security flaws, and their only job is to have eyes on glass and look for security flaws within your environment. Right? So I'm going to deep dive. Feel free to pause if you have any questions or anything else around that. So the first one that really matters is the breadth of discovery. I'm not only looking at APIs from a north-south perspective. Everyone understands the idea of north-south, right? Anybody that is not familiar with north-south, east-west? Cool. So north-south, just to give you an idea, north-south is APIs that your end user, if I'm logging on to your application, I'll be using those APIs. East-west is when you have, let's say, two systems talking to each other. So let's say your LMS talking to your credit system, or let's say inventory management talking to your shipping microservices. Those are east-west. Shadow and legacy are basically APIs that used to exist. Let's say you have V1 APIs and you have V2 APIs and V3 APIs, and now you supposedly decommission V1 APIs, but in reality that API is still available. So that's not only legacy, that's a zombie API or a shadow API, right? So those are the APIs. So you need to have continuous visibility into all these APIs. The next one is really cool, and this is again the thing that differentiates us is the threat modeling and the behavioral analytics. So what you're seeing on your screen is, I'm not sure if it's very visible from the back there, but I can start tracking merchants or merchant IDs, or let's say Sheldon is logging in and he has an SSO token. Now I can start splicing and slicing and splicing the data based on my SSO token, seeing where all Sheldon has gone. And if Sheldon is user, if a typical user logs into the bank, checks their savings, maybe looks at their FDs and logs out, and now all of a sudden Sheldon is logging in and he's downloading a bunch of invoices, right? That's an anomaly that's showing up over there. So that's where this platform comes in. You can start building behaviors, and then anytime there's any sort of anomaly in the behavior, shoot out an alert and let you know that there's something different going on over here, right? And then obviously is the last phase. I've discovered, I've see what all my APIs are, I'm adding governance to it, I'm looking for abuses now, anything that's violating the OAuth top 10, is any logical abusing, and then moving to the last end, like, okay, can I create specific alerts to start blocking this? And that's where you can, trigger maybe a Jira to your developers to take a look at an API, or trigger a WAF rule to go ahead and block the specific SSO token, stuff like that. And the last one, this is also pretty cool. The platform works as a forensics platform, right? In case there's an abuse, or in case there's an attack that's already come down your way, can I use this platform to say, okay, the last attack did X, Y, and Z. Can I check how many merchants have also done X, Y, and Z, and go through 30 days worth of data, let's say 5 billion requests altogether, and figure out which all merchants have been compromised, or which all users have been compromised. So that's what it does over here, right? So these are the different things that you need to take into consideration when you think about any of these API security vendors. Now, and the last part, right, because again, we're talking about BFSI enterprise, trust me, everything is encrypted, you don't need to worry about it. In fact, the data that we produce and when we ship to the data lake, it's no more even your data. We've removed any inferences of Aadhaar or credit card information. We've encrypted it, you hold the token, the data looks like gibberish, and because the idea is that I don't care whether user ID 169402 is actually accessing anything. I just care about the pattern and the behavior of that accessing, and that's what I'm trying to look at. So I can ingest logs from these places, process them at my data lake, and every time an alert comes out, I can fire it down to your API gateway or Kong or whatever you have, right? So that sort of rounds out the whole API security piece of it. Hopefully you guys found that entertaining, some of the real life scenarios. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take them right now. Yes?
If we have any API we are using there, so are we first managing that log in Azure itself, and then we are sending it to Akamai, or Akamai is directly able to collect the data from API if we have enabled some logging mechanism?
Good question. So no, that orange box that you see over there, right? API security node. So that is a VM that we'll deploy in your environment. You will send the logs to that API security node. At that point, we will tokenize it. You will give the tokenization key and everything. You will tokenize the data, and that will push it to the data lake.
So we have to manage first at Azure, and then we will have to send.
Correct. However, again, this is just a side plug, shameless side plug. If your applications are already delivered through Akamai, you wouldn't have to do any of that. It's a single click, and Akamai will send all of those logs to the data lake. We do an extra level of security over there called petrification. So petrification is essentially a one-way salted hash. So we not only, before we encrypt the data, we salt it, and then we hash it. The reason for salting is to protect from rainbow attacks, if you're familiar with rainbow attacks. But yeah, it's a one-way salted hash, basically unencryptable beyond the point. But yeah, to your point, yes, you will have to manage it at your end and then send it to us. If your apps are already delivered through Akamai, single click, done and dusted.
Thank you.
Sure.
So one thing I want to check is, see, like you said that a lot of banking processes are same, right? Be it CASA or anything for that matter.
Yes.
So in your service, say for example, X bank, Y bank and Z bank are giving logs to you, and you find an anomaly in say X bank, or you discovered that in X bank. Will you also want to give that, or will you pass on that information to Y and Z bank also, that guys, in the CASA process in X bank,
no,
we are finding some anomaly, so maybe there might be something like a heads up kind of a thing that,
no, good point. So let me break that down in a couple of pieces. So you're right that things like CASA and LMS and CMS, these systems tend to have similar processes and there could be vulnerabilities over there. We will never share data among customers that even if there is a generic exploit happening at X, we should go ahead and tell our customers that generic exploitation is happening over there. So that will not happen. However, Akamai's people, so the threat hunting team, if I can pull up that slide, if I can find that slide, the threat hunting team will get to know about it, and that's where the shared knowledge comes in. So definitely that team will know about it, so they'll look for that in your APIs. So that's more about APIs. However, on the platform as a whole, so just to give you an example, when Log4j happened at Akamai, Akamai already had inference that this was going to come out because we are part of the consortium that's the way that has these data or these exposures told to us. So any customer that was sitting on Akamai's WAF and already had basically a CLI module in deny, all customers day zero were protected. So we definitely share information on our WAF level because WAF is a far more similar model across. But when it comes to like API attacks, we are a little more sensitive over there. We probably won't share that. The teams will know about it. I will know about it, and I will talk to you that, hey, Mr. Customer, we've seen this happen in X, Y, and Z. Maybe you want to take a look at it over there. But that's the only point.
That's what I was saying. That
like
without giving
at a personal level, we might do it, but not at a company level. Like it won't be an automated process that, hey, I've seen this attack here. We need to figure it out over here as well.
Sure.
Right.
And sorry, another
Please.
question was around that, because I understand that the data that will go from the organizations to you will be more anonymized or maybe generalized. But what happens if there is a requirement for specifics, like for example in case of the credit intelligence, right, where there are cases specific to customers, right, like maybe a credit card number is being targeted, or maybe a Aadhaar number is targeted for authentication. So those kind of information will never be reflected in your monitoring screen, right, because that's very specific and you have already generalized the data.
Correct. So two answers to that again. Actually, there's something that I want to point out that I have not talked about, but the solution also does automatic labeling. So when in your discovery module, basically I'll have a column over there that talks about all APIs that expose any sort of PII data. For one of my customers, I've even done a custom labeling for Aadhaar and PAN card. Right, so with one click, my customer can now see all the APIs that expose Aadhaar and PAN card information. Now, to your point, sir, what will happen is if you deploy the API security node within your environment, remember the data is tokenized at your level, right? We will never have that key. So sure, we process it, and when I generate an alert, I will send that same alert back down to you. You now possess the key to de-tokenize it and see which Aadhaar card was being targeted. But that's not in our presence, and nor do we care about the number of the Aadhaar card. I just care about that API is being abused. So you will have the ability as long as you have the token.
All right, thanks.
Sure. Sure.
So,
I don't know. I can take a look at what formats we accept, but I haven't seen any sort of restrictions. The idea is that every request basically has a request and a response. So 2 log lines will get generated for that. Send both those log lines, as long as I think there are certain number of fields that we're looking for. We're looking for, yeah. I think that the only main thing that I would want is clear text, right? And that is why I'm gathering the logs from your area. So as long as I get headers, I get the URL. Maybe if you can give me cookies to read, as long as I have clear text of what the request and response looks like, I'm good. I could care less about the format. I mean, I can take a look whether there's any specifics around like which format of the log I would accept, but ideally headers, URL, post body is what I'm looking at. That's fine. That should be perfectly fine. As long as I can serialize them and send them, I think it should be fine. But I'm happy to, sort of, if I can get your contacts, I can email you and let you know.
so you mentioned about the behavior analytics.
Yes.
So typically in the web environment, when you inject in JavaScript or in mobile app, you inject an SDK, that will flow your whatever be the customers or user who is using the mobile app or web, you can understand your pattern, and then based on the behavior they will generate the score or whatever be the threat profile of the particular customer. Do you mention something specific about the API analytics? So can you please throw some more light on how do we, API is just a carrier, then how would you get, I mean, the analytics about the particular customer or user in API and behavior analytics standpoint?
Absolutely. That's
if I understood what you have just explained.
Yeah. No. Your point is extremely valid, and is one of our unique pieces. You're right. Like if I to just take a billion log lines and try to understand what your business is, my system would not know the difference between, again, going back to my silly example, between a dating app, between a bank, between a credit company. I will never be able to understand. So each time we employ or we start deploying this application, one is there's an automated system to understand. I will comb through your APIs. I will look for things like the JSON key value. I look for things like user ID or customer ID. So I'll understand some of that. Some intelligence is built into the platform. Then the other team is the team who's integrating it, also comb through your APIs, and I will want to understand what is the bank ID. Is request mein, what is the bank ID? What is the Aadhaar? What is this? What is that? What is the merchant API? What is the merchant ID? What is this? What is that? So what I'm trying to build are these entities, and every entity has like different. There's a consumer entity, there's a producer entity. So this is how I build my behavioral models. So tomorrow, if you tell me, Sheldon, this is my merchant ID. Whenever a merchant requests for a loan, they'll come under this ID. Now I know that this is a merchant, and now I'll start looking at the data. I'll start processing the data based on that data point. So I will say, okay, these are all the merchant IDs. I've enumerated all the merchant IDs. All the merchants typically do these workflows. These are the APIs they do. This is how often they go, and I'm keeping 30 days worth of data, right? So now I have a fairly good understanding of how merchants work on your application. Similarly, I'll have customers, I'll have bank accounts, I'll have XYZ. Now, based on all these analytics, I will see if there's any anomaly that is going. But the key is building out that entity. I need and you need to understand, okay, this is an entity, this is how they do. For example, we had integrated with a, similar to your ZeroDA or your Grow, right? What we started to see is a user was logging in and they were looking for spot prices. ठीक है, normal behavior. But what happened, and what we learned is a typical user now, and this is for this specific platform, typically looks at 8 different spot prices and then they make a purchase. This user was going through hundreds of spot prices, and that's essentially they're trying to grab data. Ya to enumeration, they were doing enumeration. Sorry for switching to Hindi. Either they were doing enumeration or they were basically doing inventory grab of all the spot prices. They were removing it from that platform. Maybe they were putting it on some screen or whatever. But this was an abnormal behavior, and I need to understand what my baseline is. Any CIO, CISO will need to understand what is baseline and what is an anomaly from that baseline.
Typically, you generate the score of the particular profile in the backend, and whenever their score is getting higher, you ask for some notification or
score. Not a score, sir. I'm just building behaviors. What is the typical behavior of a merchant?
How do you conclude that the behavior is not normal? You must have something in backend.
I'm building a baseline. I'm building a baseline. No, there's. It's not like you're always being attacked. Now, if you're being attacked and I onboard it, then you might see abnormal behavior, but eventually there will be a baseline that 99% of the users come this way. This is the typical, pattern of usage, and then there was an anomaly, and something that's very cool. So if you give me a specific user, like one specific user, I can literally scrub through their data for 30 days, where all that user has gone, which all APIs they've gone. So this gives you the ability to say, if you want to do a forensics analysis that, okay, what is Sheldon doing on my platform? Where all has he gone? Which all APIs has he gone? Which all APIs have returned a 200 OK, which have given 400? So now I can start tracking that user, and again, the system is building a case based on me. So hopefully that answers. Perfect. Any other questions?
Integration capability, if you have in Azure, then it's a service level integration, or maybe the Azure is in CSP. You can integrate with an API hosted in multiple services.
Yeah. So I can integrate with a whole bunch of applications, sir. At the end of the day, leaving out all these logos over here, as long as you can ship the logs to me, basically in my API security node, you can ship the logs to me. It's in clear text. That's all I need. But yes, we have built-in built-in integrations with all of these. I think there are a few new ones over here. We already have Akamai. I think we have Cloudflare as well. Azure is there.
Log-based integration?
It's logs. I'm looking at logs.
So if we give you the Datadog logs integration, then it's good for entire request space?
Done. As long as you continue to give me the as in it's a continuous flow of logs. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you have in a hybrid model also, or only the SaaS based?
There's no deployed model. I'm guessing hybrid means there's an offline model. No. This is a completely SaaS platform. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
How do I do API discovery? So basically you're giving me all of your logs, right? And now I get to see where all users are making requests, what all. So that's where I start building the logs. Yes. So you're right. So if you have like multiple environments, you'll have, let's say you have AWS Singapore, you have AWS Mumbai, and then you have Azure Pune, and then you have some on-premise. So you will have to sit and deploy that API security node wherever you have these API choke points. Wherever, let's say you have an API gateway somewhere, that will be the ideal point where you want to deploy this. Okay. Third-party APIs, so that will be under. So what you would want to look at, sir, is essentially APIs that you own. If you're making API requests to a third party, again, you can always send it to us, and then we can enumerate it. But I'm thinking about Google workflow and how that would happen. So let me take this offline with you. I'll need to understand the workflow a little bit. We're ready for the quiz. But sir, one last question.
So I noticed you had integration in CI/CD pipeline.
Yes.
But from what we understood so far is that you need to send the logs over.
Yes.
But in the pipeline, it's still the API is kind of in development. So how does that work?
So for the development, like if you're building out new APIs, I won't have any integration for that. As long as the APIs are being used, even if it's in a QA environment, it's fine. For the CI/CD pipeline, I can take a look at what they're talking about over here. My guess is if you have like Jenkins CI and you're generating log lines over there, or any APIs over there, those you can ship to us. But I think there's
because API calls might not be active out there, right?
Yeah, yeah. So if you're talking about APIs that are coming to development, like they're sitting in your QA environment, can you double click what, like when you mean CI/CD, what do you mean?
So, see, when we talk about pipelines, right, the code is developed, pushed onto the repository, and then it flows, right? And then there are multiple tools which come into play, which will kind of assess the code as it's flowing within the pipeline. So at our end, right, we have SAST, and then, we do library scanning, we may, check the container and all that,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So it's just like, developed code which is kind of flowing in. There are no requests and responses being actively made to that.
Okay.
All right. So just wanted to understand in that context, how would, because the logs which are getting generated out there might be, how many vulnerabilities have been identified on the API.
So no, that won't come into play with us right now. But very interestingly, that is feedback that we've taken. So in Q1 of 2024, we're coming up with a module that in your CI/CD pipeline, when you're starting to create new APIs, before you sort of put them out in the wild, we'll be able to test them for various OWASP security checks. So that is something that we're coming in. So that we'll hook into your CI/CD pipeline. But at this point, we don't have anything to do with that. As long as they're live and there's a request and response coming in, that's where we start protecting you at this point. But yes, we're going to do shift left.
Sure.
Yes. Correct. 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 So basically, so if I had to rephrase the question is, how will, so you create a baseline and you're saying you have a hype event, let's say Flipkart's billion day sale or Eros end of reason sale from Myntra. What happens over there? So very interestingly, this solution is not an inline solution; it's an out of band solution, right? What we're doing is an offline analysis. Let's say there is a sale. Akamai will not interfere with your APIs. We will not block your APIs. We will probably create an alert saying that, hey, there's heightened usage from a certain merchant. We will not block anything. So sure, we'll have to suppress that. We'll have to sit and understand, okay, it's a hype cycle, it's an event that is happening, therefore there's heightened usage. So we'll generate an alert, and then you can always suppress that alert if it's not possible, or it's fine, or we can fine tune the rule saying that, hey, this merchant, it's fine if they use these APIs at a higher level. So basically what we're looking at is the consumption of APIs is be higher. Yeah. Yeah, we can ignore it, right? Because it's not that it's good that the system is generating an alert, because there is a increased. Now what you do with that alert is completely different, because you have an understand. Yes.
When we discuss about the payment gateways, right? So thousands of merchants are there who have their sales throughout the years.
Sure.
So if we go with the ignoring this step, then maybe we need to ignore for complete year.
No, very valid point, sir. Let me talk to you offline. Unfortunately, my colleague is telling me we're running short of time, and we have a whole another cool section coming up. So we're gonna. Yes. Yes. So no, there's no control. I have not seen any control being deployed for the client yet. What I would assume is, I've not come across this question. I can figure it out for you, but what I assume is any logs beyond 30 days, we just probably delete them. But yeah, we don't keep a backup or anything like that. But if there's any systems I can. Thank you. Yes, cool. Okay, cool. आ रहे हैं ना, आ जाए. Okay. You guys have used this system before, right? Yeah. Cool. So top 3 people will get prizes. I think accuracy and speed is what we're looking for. Cool, cool. I hear someone saying yes, so very enthusiastic.
When they're all ready, we'll start.
No, it's cool. You guys can hear me, right? Cool. We'll give another 10 seconds and then we'll start. Cool. Are we good to start? Anybody waiting for it? Okay, we have one gentleman waiting over there. All right. Give. Anybody still scanning? One person still scanning. Cool. Let's start. Go for it. This was like in my first slide. Very cool. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, please.
Lots of group answers going on there. Huh? The top 3 win, you're competing with each other, remember. So the correct answer is NeoSec. That's the company we acquired last year. So if you paid attention to most of the stuff that Sheldon spoke about, some of this was there on the slide, so fairly easy. Most of you are almost there. Yeah. Or 31 to 32% roughly is what we see globally, but I mean, obviously we can hope for that to be only on the higher side as we move forward. This one's easy. It was like right on one of the slides. So hopefully you get this one right. Give us some validation as well that Akamai is just not CDN. We just don't do only WAF. We do a lot more. I gave the answer away, so hopefully you get that right. Okay, awesome. Who are the 4 who thought we did only CDN after like 45 minutes of API security? Okay. This one's easy too. It's not a 24/7 SOC. It's a completely different service. Super easy. This one's like, I think we dealt upon it quite a bit. So hopefully everyone's tuned in. Okay. So the right answers and the fastest. So it's like somewhat like the KBC fastest fingers first, if you will. So hopefully you're also getting it quicker than others in the room. Just last couple of questions, and then we'll move to our second segment. Answer is query. Okay. We have 10 questions. The 11th one is actually the leaderboard. So just calling that out. The tool says it's 11, but actually there are 10 questions. Everybody likes discovery, seems like. Same answer for both questions. Huh? Okay, let's move to the last one. Leaderboard. Yeah, one more question. No? 10 or 11, yeah. That's the last question. Trick question, I hear. Sheldon's telling us it's a trick question. We didn't go into it in much depth. Okay. Half of you got it right, so that's great. So that gives us the leaderboard. Give it a few more seconds. All right. So Mr. Prasad, Manoj Arora, and Mr. Manoj Arora and Mr. Ajit, can you please join us on stage? We have a quick goodie bag to give away.
Hey, hi. Welcome back after the quiz, and my name is Prateek, and I will cover the second part of the session. Sheldon discussed too much on the digital transformation aspects, right? Covering on the API security of it, and that's how the lot of organizations are evolving. But generally, when you move to the digital transformation journey, right, there's one side when we talk about the applications, right, where you're having a lot of APIs coming in. We also see a lot of infrastructure transformation which is happening, right? So we are living in an era where everyone is talking about the digital transformation. Any idea how the infrastructure transformation has happened? Have you guys, before fiber optics or maybe a twisted pair cabling, any idea what was running prior to that? How the infrastructure was running? Coaxial cable. Anybody has heard about that? So we have coax cable, and then you move from coax to the twisted pair, and from twisted pair to fiber optics and Wi-Fi and the stuff like that. Similarly, the transformation also happened towards the IP, Internet Protocol we're talking about. Any idea what was running before IP? Sorry? IPX, XPX. What else? Sorry? ARPANET to some level. How many of you heard about X25 protocol? Frame relay. So you have a lot of organizations which are running on X25 and frame relays. So those coming from the financial institutions, right? You know, one of the biggest network of India was running on X25. Any guesses? No. Bombay Stock Exchange. BSE was running on X25, right? So from X25, they evolved to an IP, and then what next, right? And the beauty is that in X25, you don't have to talk, you don't have to rely on too much on the IP part, right? You can do voice over X25. You can make the broadcast traffic move, right? So the new exchange which came from NSE, that is predominantly on the IP part, and that's where BSE starts moving from X25 to the IP. So there's a lot of transformation which happened in that space. Similarly, in the data center space also, there's a lot of transformation happened, right? Organizations move from VLAN, then everybody start moving towards SDNs, right? You have Cisco's of the world's coming and talking about SDN. We have VMware's coming on to SDN's part, right? And now organizations are moving towards something called as application-based segmentation, right? So I'll try to stitch the story what Sheldon has talked about on the application part. We are talking more on the API security, and then how this journey on the applications which is running in data center correlates with how the data infra transformation which is happening more on the application based segmentation part, right? So in this slide that you talked about, one side we are talking about the API part, and the other side we are talking about the workloads, right? Effectively, in either case, we are protecting the workloads, right? One side we are protecting from the APIs part, and from the second side, we are more focused on how the applications are performing, right? So the idea is that when we consolidate everything, we are moving towards the zero trust framework, which is one is on the north-south part, and the second is on the east-west part. So on the east-west, in the previous session, we focused more on the API security. Now we are focused more on identity-based segmentation, which is more related to how the applications are talking, what traffic is moving from the applications, and how the applications are interdependent between the different workloads which are running in your organization. So this is the key which brings the entire platform, right? And the global platform which Sheldon has talked about in the previous slides, right? We are leveraging the same platform to bring both the API security and the micro-segmentation part as a same portfolio, right? Sheldon talked about acquisition of Neosec, bringing into the API security part. So that's leveraging the global platform, and then you start stitching the security operations on top of it, right? Bringing the SaaS platform, bringing the on-premise management part, bringing the what Akamai is doing from the threat intel point of view into the similar platform, and wrapping it around the security and the support ecosystem around that. So how do we do that? So you generally have the micro-segmentation piece, which is related to a infra or an application-based segmentation to it, which is primarily the east-west part of it. And then you have a north-south part, right, which is an access part, right? Everybody has heard about ZTN, right? Zero Trust Network Access, right? Now, objective is that how you club all those things and bring as a part of the same portfolio, which means that if I am a user who is trying to access a PCI server within my organization using a north-south traffic, and at the same point of time, the traffic is moving from the PCI server to the non-PCI server, how you bring the complete visibility of that particular framework. So that's the direction in which this particular framework is getting built, right? So you have a application-based segmentation, which is primarily talking about the east-west part, and bringing the zero trust framework using the access-based solution framework, and basically providing a threat intel platform with the DNS security parameters that we have seen. So we have seen in the previous slides that close to 30% of the traffic on internet is seen by Akamai, right? So what we did, we bring that DNS capabilities, what we are seeing onto the internet, and we are trying to ingest that intel into the similar platform. So enriching more and more onto your data center traffic, and bringing the continuous monitoring using the Hunt portfolio of it. So what we are trying to essentially do is that whatever we are running within the data center from an application point of view, we start analyzing the traffic between the applications, how application is talking. So slight tricky, right? Previously we were talking about the APIs, right? Now we are not talking about the APIs, we are talking about how the applications are talking and what is the interdependency of an application. To give an analogy, you have a database server and you have a web server, right? In a database server, you have a MongoDB as a process, which is talking to a web server, which is running Apache as a process, right? How this communication is happening. And why it is important, because when you have this kind of understanding, you actually nail down on what kind of lateral movements are happening in your organization, what kind of ransomware movement that can happen in your organization. So you map the application processes within the organization, and when you map it, you can easily bind with your north-south traffic, because on the ZTNA part, you are actually essentially allowing a user to access a specific application. Are you trying to understand how we are stitching this entire story? And then when these kind of things are happening primarily from the global customers, you bring the day one kind of attack understanding. And that is where the threat hunt capabilities of Akamai comes into picture. So when you talk about day one, right, you understand the difference between day 0 and day 1? What do you mean by day 1? Any guesses? Sorry? Yeah, so day 1 is, yeah, absolutely. Intel is already there and you published it. I am a hacker. Now I know, okay, this is there. Let's start finding what exactly is happening. So Log4j is a kind of a day 1 vulnerability, right? So your supply chain attack from the SolarWinds is a day 1 vulnerability, right? I got to know, I published it, and then the script kiddies start figuring out what exactly is happening into network. Now, if you have this intel, somebody should tell, okay, these are the things which are running over there, and then you can share the intel with the customers. You can figure out what exactly is running in infrastructure. That's where the Hunt capabilities comes into picture. So that's how the entire framework is getting built. Now let's look at how the things are happening. This is typically the most common slides. Everybody is aware that most of the traffic within the organization is the east-west traffic, and you don't get the visibility of how the things are happening. So actually, the initial journey starts from the visibility, right? And that's the common when we see in the API also. You can protect only what you can see. If you can't see anything, you can't protect the things running in your organization. And this gives a clue that how the network transformation is happening, right? So we talked about infrastructure transformation, that the data center transformation is also happening. If you look over here, we are not only talking about what is running into the data center, we are also talking how the different public clouds and how the workloads are spread across onto your public clouds, right? You are on the multi-cloud platform, and the traffic is moving from GCP to Azure, you don't know what exactly is happening. Or when the traffic is moving from AWS onto your on-premise, you don't know what kind of applications are getting accessed, right? You only see what is the IP address, or you only see what is the port. You actually don't get a visibility of how the intra-application dependence is happening. Your front end sitting on AWS and your database is sitting on your data center, how the communication is happening, right? So those are the typical gaps which actually gives a blind spot when your applications are moving between different infrastructure. So what we essentially see is that traditionally every organization is adapting to the traditional way of segmentation, where you are binded to the network-based policies. You are attached to a network-centric policies, right? You map everything based on the firewalls, right? Traffic increases, you move from 2 Gbps, 5 Gbps, 10 Gbps. it's very, very slow in terms of adaptation, right? Flexibility, agility is something which is missing. And if we see the previous slides where we have seen how the data center transformation is happening, you effectively run from pillar to post by deploying firewalls across everywhere. You will deploy firewalls on all the public clouds and on the data centers, and you don't know how the correlation is happening. So the way we are looking now and the way the transformation is happening is we map everything to a software based framework. So effectively, instead of putting a firewall at the data center, you are moving towards an application based approach. So the infrastructure is becoming a software centric, right? You are actually attaching the policies on the workload rather than attaching the policies on the infrastructure. So I will have a security policy running on my database server, on my web server. I will have a security policies for my PCI environment, separate policies for my Swift environment. So you are moving from an infra based approach to a workload centric approach and workload centric policies. What it happens that it gives you a much more flexibility and agility when you start moving in that particular framework. So how do we do that? Generally, in any kind of environment, when we are seeing and this kind of transformation which is happening, right, you see lot of bottlenecks, right? And the first bottleneck is the hybrid infrastructure. You must be running something on the virtualized infrastructure, something on the bare metal, you are running on the public cloud. You don't know how the things are happening, what kind of intradependency which is there, right? So hybrid infrastructure is one which actually stops you towards moving towards these kinds of framework. Lack of visibility is another thing which comes into picture, because you don't know what is happening, how the multiple processes are moving within your organization, which actually leads to process complexity. And if you are running on the public cloud with a containerized environment, then the DevOps becomes much more challenging in nature, right? So these are the clear obstacles that we see when we are moving towards these kinds of framework. So what we bring over here, we say that when we move towards this kind of transformation approach, especially on the application based segmentation, what you see on the middle of the slides, actually you transform towards what you see on the right hand side, which is much more contextual in nature. So from the diagrammatic point of view, we talked about DMZ or development and the stuff like that, but in the real life you can define the way you want. You can put it, okay, PCI segment, non-PCI environment, Swift environment, net banking environment, the way you want to put it, right? And then you can define how the things are happening within that particular environment. To move to this environment with Akamai approach, you essentially don't have to do any change in the network, which means that if my database and my web server are part of a same VLAN, if I need to bring them as a part of two different segments, you can do that without changing any IP, right? Which means that we are moving away from an IP based policies and moving towards context based policies which are defining to our organization. So we define database is allowed to talking to web, or my web is allowed to talking to a non-web application or environment. How do you do that essentially? So this is the way you build the entire infrastructure and deploy it into the organization, right? You are having a database, so you can start grouping your applications which are running within the organization. You can put an applications, you can put the databases, you can put the web traffic, the way you want to structure the things in your environment, and then you can start defining who should talk to what. You can start moving which application is allowed to talk to which applications. Now when you move in this space, what are the common use cases that we are trying to build? First is that it brings you a complete visibility and clarity in your east-west traffic. You can actually see my applications, how they are talking to each other, and you can clearly define the intra-dependency within your application. You start building a ring within your applications, right? You build a ring for your Swift application, which means that my Swift applications are allowed to talk to each other, but any traffic coming from a non-Swift based applications is not allowed to talk to each other, right? So you move into an application based granularity, and I will touch base how the things happens. So if you look at this, now we have moved from a traditional segmentation or traditional data center based definition to a more logical or a contextual based infrastructure, right? You define how many servers are running on AWS, how many servers are running on your containers or Azure, right? And you can start seeing what are the different application movements which are happening between them. This all can be done on one single pane of glass, which means that you don't have to rush between different consoles on AWS, GCP, data center and the stuff like that. Everything can be run into a one single console and you can get clarity on this. Now if you zoom in into this particular framework, you actually start seeing how your different applications are clubbed within your organizations, right? So if you take our example, right, we take a CRM as an application. Now within my CRM, I might have multiple entities which are running, right, which is related to a web, which is related to a database, how these different entities are talking, right? So that's where you have a high level of segmentation that you do, and then you move from that segmentation to a micro segmentation based approach, which is primarily focused more onto an application. So you start understanding how these applications are there, and this graph actually starts giving you a entire intradependencies which are there. So when somebody is talking, my AD is talking to a DNS, it actually tells you how that dependency of an application is happening in that part. Moving a bit deep into that, it can actually gives you a granularity in terms of process based communication over here. So if you see the communication happening over here, you can actually see how the different processes are talking, right? So in the previous session when we talk about API, here we are moving more into the process based communication. Now the benefit of moving in this based approach is that you are actually killing the way the lateral movement happens in any of the organization. When you create the policies based on the definition of a process running in the organization, you can actually nail down the things which are there. So you define that my web server running as an Apache as a process can only talk to a database server running MongoDB as a process. So you actually control the process based communication. Any malicious communication happening based on the process, only this process is allowed, and any other process running beyond this is not allowed. So this is how actually you move deeper into the application part. Other important thing is also it gives you a application level dependency. It can tell you from the discovery part how the different applications are dependent, what process are dependent for communication between the two different applications. So in the short, this is how you start defining the application based segmentation. So you move away from a network based segmentation approach and you start adapting a application based segmentation approach where you start defining the context of your applications within organizations and how they are talking to each other. A deeper dive into when you move into the process based part, it not only tells you how the different applications or what are the different interdependency for the application which is there, it will also tell you from which path a particular application or which path a particular process is executed. It gives you a entire granularity of the path. It can give you the details in terms of which user has run the process and what kind of communication that particular user is trying to do within the organization. So with this, actually you move towards a zero trust segmentation in totality within the organization. You define what are the common services, how these common services are talking, and those common services how they are related to your applications which are running within your organization. When you define this and when you understand that zero trust framework is built, right, that's where you move on to the policy creation based on the process. And the things becomes much more easier with us because we bring lot of templarization into this particular framework. So you bring what are the DNS based segment log SVC host as a process, right, because it is required to run within an organization for the communication, and lot of ransomware movements are happening utilizing certain services of SVC host. So it is very important that you don't only control the processes part, but you also go deep into the service based understanding, right? So with Akamai this solution, you not only host, within that it is allowed to execute only a specific bits as a service. And bits you can define specific domains, right? So you allow only a specific domains which runs within your organization. And that's how you control the stuff into that part. The things becomes much more easier because when you bring all those ransomware based communication templates into the solution portfolio. So it starts creating an automation templates where you click on the template and you start defining where you want to control the ransomware using bits as a service or not. Then you augment all this particular framework using additional capabilities more from the deception, which is basically a honeypot kind of a thing, or you start building the DNS based threat intel which you ingest from the cloud framework and bring into the overall solution. Now this solution expands across the flavors within the organization, which means that you can move right from your legacy stuff which is running on HPUX or AIX up to the Kubernetes platform, or to an extent into the containers or the PaaS services also, which means that when you start building the framework, you are not just restricted to the data center part, you move this onto the cloud. And with this you can build the reference architecture based on how the overall data center can be looking like, right? You want to do an integration with different orchestration platforms which are there, you can put it onto the multi-cloud platform and bring all of them in one single pane of glass. So that's how you actually start building the entire framework within your organization using the next generation of the application based segmentation, incorporating the identity into the overall solution framework. Any questions? Cool. So with this I would like to call Aparna if we have any yeah, we can do the quiz. Thanks.
Okay, just like we did before, we have another short quiz. This one's just about 6 questions. Please scan the QR code and we'll just wait for everyone to join us. So while everyone's joining us, I just want to take the opportunity to thank DSEI for giving us this opportunity to be here and share our perspective on API security and segmentation. And a big shout out to Sheldon and Prateek for really going deep into some of the aspects of the solution, and hopefully you all found it useful. We do have a short feedback survey at the end of this quiz, so we'd request you to please scan that code as well and give us your feedback. That will just help us to make these sessions more productive and useful for our future events like this one. Okay, is everyone on? 5 more seconds and then we'll get started with the quiz. Anyone still scanning? Okay. In this quiz, the top 2 will get to walk away with a goodie bag. So remember, individual quiz, you're competing with the person next to you, so your choice. Okay, we'll get started then. I think Prateek talked about this quite a bit, so hopefully you've all registered the name of the service. Okay, awesome. Most of you have got that right. It is Hunt. I think this is top of mind for every security professional, should be easy to answer. Fairly straightforward, but slightly tricky there. I mean, if you're in the security space, you should like be able to crack this one as well. Speed is of essence, though. Okay. Great. Everyone's voted. The last one is the right answer. Visualization, mapping, and policy. Also straightforward. So for those of you who thought we did only CDN and WAF, hopefully this should again reinforce the point that Akamai does a lot more. We are at booth 39, by the way, tomorrow and day after. So anything you want to ask us, any questions, anything you want to know more, please do feel free to drop in at our booth number 39. We will be there to speak to you and answer your questions. That's the second last question. Okay. So Akamai segmentation can be used with all kinds of environments. And now we come to the last question here. Is Akamai Guardicore only an agent-based solution? That's the keyword is only. I gave the answer away. Hopefully you got it right. All right, Mr. Ajit is again in the lead on this one. Is it the same, Mr. Ajit? Give it a few more seconds. All right, so the top two are Mr. Ajit and Ms. Ranjini Setupati. Please do join us on stage. We have a goodie bag to give away. And thank you everyone for being sportive and responding to the quiz. We have a short survey, a feedback survey here. If you can please scan this code and give us your feedback, we would really appreciate that. It motivates us to do more, come back to DSCI, do more masterclasses and share the knowledge we have. So please do take a couple of minutes to answer this feedback survey. Thank you.